My name is Gordon. I'm 63 years old. 2 days before Christmas, my wife stood in our kitchen with a ham glaze brush in her hand and told me, "Your mother's not coming this year. My parents don't want to eat next to a woman with cafeteria hands who smells like fryer grease." I didn't yell. I just untied my apron, folded it over the chair, and said, "Then they won't be eating here at all." She thought I was bluffing. By 8 o'clock that night, she knew I wasn't. But to understand what I did, you have to understand how long it took me to do it. Before I get into it, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every one of them. I've run a two-man plumbing outfit out of Dayton, Ohio for 31 years. Frozen pipe at midnight, water heater on Christmas morning, sewage backup an hour before somebody's graduation party. That's been my life. It's not glamorous work. You come home smelling like other people's basements, but it's honest. It kept my kids in shoes, and it paid off the little brick house on Creighton Avenue free and clear before I ever remarried. My wife came from a different kind of family. Her father spent 40 years selling commercial insurance and never once changed his own oil. Her mother plays bridge at a club with a guard shack at the entrance and refers to waitresses as the help without a flicker of shame. They're the kind of people who judge a man's worth by his watch and a woman's worth by her manicure. When my wife and I got married, second marriage for both of us, 12 years ago now, I told myself her parents would warm up once they got to know me. They never did. They just got quieter about it. And then there's my mother. Mom is 84. She spent 38 years as a cook in the cafeteria at Hawthorne Elementary, over in the part of town where a lot of kids came to school hungry and went home hungrier. She started at 5:30 in the morning, hairnet on, radio low, and by 7 she had 400 breakfasts ready. Her hands tell the whole story. Burn scars on both forearms from the steam tables, knuckles thick from arthritis and 40-pound stock pots, a right thumb that doesn't quite straighten anymore from an oven door that slammed wrong in 1987. To some people, I guess those hands look rough. To me, they look like the only reason I grew up at all. My father died when I was 9. Heart gave out in the parking lot of the plant, 41 years old. Mom never remarried. She just worked. Cafeteria all day, then 3 nights a week at a diner on Route 4. And somehow there was still a hot supper on our table, and a handwritten note in my lunch bag every single day until I graduated. Stand up straight. Be kind. Love, Mom. I found a shoebox full of those notes in her closet a few years back. She kept carbon copies of some of them, if you can believe that. Said she liked remembering what she told me. Even now, retired 20 years, she still bakes for the funeral dinners at St. Bridget's. Still shows up at the community center every December to help cook the free Christmas meal for folks who don't have anywhere to go. Half this town ate her food as children. Grown men at the hardware store still call her Miss D from the lunch line, and she still asks about their mothers by name. For as long as I can remember, Christmas meant Mom, even the lean years. After my first marriage fell apart, when I was living over a transmission shop and eating off a card table, she'd show up Christmas Eve with a crock pot of her chicken and dumplings and a tin of those powdered sugar crescent cookies, and we'd watch It's a Wonderful Life on a TV with a coat hanger for an antenna. It never once felt like we were poor. That's a trick only certain women know how to pull off. So when I married my wife and we moved into a house with a dining room big enough for 2 families, I had this picture in my head. Mom at the table, telling her stories. Everybody passing the rolls. The kind of Christmas she's spent 40 years giving to other people's kids. It didn't go like the picture. The first Christmas we hosted, I noticed my mother-in-law inspecting her fork after Mom set the table, holding it up to the light like she was at a yard sale. I noticed my father-in-law asking Mom, twice with this little smile, whether she'd ever wanted to do anything more with her life. I noticed my wife lighting candles in the dining room before Mom even arrived, then cracking the window over the sink, saying something about the smell of the roast clinging to things. The roast hadn't even gone in the oven yet. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself Mom didn't notice, that she was too busy fussing over everybody to catch it. But here's the truth I had to sit with later. She caught all of it. Women like my mother catch everything. They've spent their whole lives reading rooms they were never invited into. She just smiled and refilled the gravy boat because she'd decided a long time ago that her son's peace was worth more than her own pride. And I let her make that trade, year after year. That's the part of the story I'm not proud of. This year was supposed to be simple. Christmas Eve dinner at our place. My son and his wife couldn't make it down from Michigan, but my wife's parents were coming, along with her brother and his wife. I'd ordered a standing rib roast from the butcher on Wayne Avenue back in November. 7 bones, the kind of roast a plumber thinks twice about, because Mom once told me her own mother made prime rib exactly one time in her life for Christmas of 1952, and she'd never forgotten it. I wanted to give her that. The morning of the 23rd, I called her to firm up when I'd pick her up. She lives 20 minutes out in Xenia, in the same little white house I grew up in. Hey, Ma, you want me to grab you around 3 tomorrow, or you want to come early and boss me around in the kitchen? There was a pause, just a beat too long. My mother does not pause. Oh, honey, I thought you knew, she said, and her voice had that bright, careful sound she uses when she's lying to spare somebody. I'm not coming this year. Your wife called me Tuesday. Said you two decided to keep it small. Just her side. Said it'd be easier on everybody. I was standing at the counter with a coffee cup halfway to my mouth, and I just set it down. Slow. She said we decided. It's fine, Gordy. Honest. I've got a little ham steak in the icebox, and they're running the midnight mass from the Vatican on Channel 48. I'll have my cookies. You know I don't need a fuss. 38 years feeding other people's children. 20 more feeding this whole town for free. And my mother was telling me she didn't need a fuss, alone, on Christmas Eve, with a ham steak. Ma, let me call you back. Gordy, don't go starting anything. I'm not starting anything, I said, which turned out to be true, in a way. I wasn't starting anything. I was finishing something. I found my wife in the kitchen brushing glaze onto a test ham, the good Spody plates already stacked on the island, place cards in her looping handwriting fanned out next to them. I counted them without meaning to. 6 cards. None of them said Mom. Why did you call my mother and tell her we decided to keep Christmas small? She didn't even stop brushing, because we are keeping it small. 6 people is small. 7 people is also small. Try again. She set the brush down and sighed. The sigh she does when she's about to explain the world to me. Gordon, my parents are coming. You know how my mother is. Last year she had to sit across from your mom's. She waved her hand vaguely. Those hands, the scars, and the smell, honey. I'm sorry, but it's like a deep fryer follows her in the door. Daddy said it ruins the wine. My parents don't want to share a table with a woman with cafeteria hands. I'm not putting them through that on Christmas Eve. I want to tell you I said something devastating in that moment. I didn't. I stood there for what felt like a long time, looking at this woman I'd married, at the candles, at the 6 place cards, and the only thing I could see was my mother in 1971, standing at a steam table at 5:30 in the morning so that I could grow up and one day stand in a granite kitchen and hear her call to smell. Those hands, I said, real quiet, paid for my childhood. Nobody's saying she's not a hard worker. Stop. I untied my apron, folded it over the chair back. My heart was going like a sump pump, but my voice came out level, and I'm glad it did, because I wanted her to hear every word. If my mother's not welcome at this table, then nobody is. Not your folks. Not your brother. Nobody. She blinked at me. What is that supposed to mean? It means you should keep your phone handy tomorrow, I said. You'll see. And I walked out to the garage because that's where the men in my family have always gone to think. I didn't slam anything. I didn't kick anything. That's not how I was raised. And besides, my mother always said the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest one. I just stood there in the cold with my breath fogging, under the shop light, surrounded by 50 years of accumulated life. My father's old pipe wrenches hanging on the pegboard. Mom kept them all those years and gave them to me when I got my license. The dented thermos she sent me to my first job with. And taped above the workbench, gone soft and yellow, one of her lunch notes I'd framed about 10 years ago. Stand up straight, be kind, love, Mom. Is a memory I go to sometimes, standing in that garage. The winter I was 16, I wanted to quit school and go to work, because I'd done the math on what Mom made and what we owed, and the math made me sick. I told her at the kitchen table. She didn't raise her voice. She just took off her hairnet, set it down, and showed me her hands. Turned them over slow, palms up, so I could see every burn and every callus. "These are mine," she said. "I earned every mark on them so you'd never have to choose between eating and learning. You quit school. You're not saving me. You're wasting me. Now finish your supper." I finished school. I finished trade school after that. Every license on my office wall has her fingerprints on it, whether anybody can see them or not. Standing there under the shop light, something settled in my chest. Not rage. Rage burns off. This was colder and more useful than rage. It was clarity. Some lines, once a person crosses them, there's no walking it back with an apology and a nice brunch. There's only showing them publicly, plainly, in a way nobody can argue with. Exactly what they spat on. I called Mom back. She answered on half a ring, which told me she'd been sitting by the phone. "Ma, did my wife really tell you it was going to be just her side, those words?" A long breath on the line. "She said her parents were particular about company, sweetheart. She wasn't ugly about it. Don't make it ugly." "You never in your life made anything ugly," I said. "Other people manage that all by themselves." I looked up at the framed note. "Don't cook tomorrow. Don't eat that ham steak. I'll come by for you at 4. Gordy, what are you up to?" "Something I should have done about 11 Christmases ago. Wear your good coat." I hung up before she could argue, and then I made one more call to the community center on Leland Street, the one attached to St. Bridget's, where Mom has worked the free Christmas meal every December for 20 years. A custodian named Hutch answered, a Navy vet with a gray ponytail who's known my mother since his daughter went through Hawthorne Elementary in the 90s. "Hutch, it's Gordy, Miss D's boy. Y'all still serving the community dinner tomorrow at 5. "Every year, brother. Why, what do you need?" "Room on the serving line," I said, "for about $300 worth of standing rib roast." Hutch was quiet a second, and then he laughed, low and slow. "Son, I don't know what's going on over there, but the answer's yes. Christmas Eve. My wife spent the morning in a flurry of vacuuming and candle placement, and I spent it cooking. That's the part people don't expect when I tell this story. I cooked that dinner. Roast in at noon, low and slow, just like the butcher said. Potatoes scrubbed, green beans with the bacon, because my mother taught me green beans without bacon are a punishment, not a side dish. My wife took it as a peace offering. She actually patted my arm around 2 o'clock and said she was glad I'd come around, and that her parents would be there at 5:30. "Sounds about right," I said. At 3:45, her brother and his wife arrived early, and the 4 of them gathered in the living room with wine. I could hear them through the kitchen doorway. Her father was already holding forth about somebody at the club. And then her mother's voice, light as a dinner bell. "And we're spared the lunch lady this year, I understand?" "Mom," my wife said, but she laughed when she said it. They all laughed. Soft, comfortable, agreeing laughter, the kind people only make when they're certain everyone in the room is the same kind of person. I stood at the counter with an oven mitt in my hand, and any doubt I'd been carrying packed its bags and left. What happened over the next 20 minutes, I did calmly, quietly, and in my socks so the floor wouldn't creak. The roast came out of the oven, golden and crackling, and went straight into the big foil pan I'd staged in the pantry that morning. Potatoes, into a lidded pot wrapped in beach towels, green beans, gravy, the rolls, Mom's recipe of crescent cookies I'd made from her card, every last bit of it. Out the kitchen door, down the back steps, into the bed of my work van between the pipe racks, snug as fittings in a tray. Indiana cold December air, low pale sun, my breath in clouds, Bing Crosby drifting faintly from the living room where 4 people were toasting their own good taste. The last thing I did before I'd pulled out of the driveway was stick a note to the oven door with a refrigerator magnet. 5 words. Dinner moved, dress as casual. Then I drove. Past the dark hardware store, past the gas station with the inflatable snowman, down Route 35 with $300 of prime rib riding shotgun. And I don't believe I have ever in my life felt more like my mother's son. At the community center, the lot was already half full. Inside, the hall smelled like coffee and canned corn casserole. Paper snowflakes the Sunday school kids had cut out taped along the windows. 2 flags up front, the American flag and the POW flag. Because Hutch runs the hall and Hutch doesn't forget anybody. Folding tables in long rows. Maybe 150 folks expected. Retirees on fixed incomes. A few families between apartments. Widowers who can't face a holiday kitchen. Some guys from the VA. When I came through the door with that roast pan, Hutch took one look and hollered, "Boys, we got promoted to the steakhouse." 3 vets came off their chairs to help me unload, laughing the whole way to the van and back. Nobody asked me why. That's the thing about a hall like that. They figure if you showed up with the food, the story's yours to tell or not tell. One more thing, I told Hutch. I've got to go get the guest of honor. Now, if you've stayed with me this far, hold on, because everything to this point was just the setup. What happened when my wife's family came through those doors an hour later is the part I'll be telling at my own funeral. Mom was waiting on her porch in her good wool coat, the green one, with a tin of cookies in her lap because of course she'd baked anyway. You cannot stop that woman with anything short of a court order. She narrowed her eyes at the van, at me, at my grin. "Gordon Lee, what did you do?" "Ma," I said, opening her door, "Christmas moved. You're spending it with people who know what you're worth." She was quiet most of the ride, hands folded on the cookie tin. Then, somewhere past the fairgrounds, she said, "Your father used to get that exact look, like a man who already shook the hornet's nest and made his peace with the hornets. Did it work out for him? Married me, didn't he?" When we walked into that hall, I swear the noise lifted like somebody turned a dial. Ms. D. It came from 3 directions at once. A man about my age, big fella, beard, motorcycle vest, got up from the 3rd table and crossed the whole room to hug her, and I heard him say, "2nd grade, 1979. You used to slip me a second breakfast and mark it down as a spill." A woman from the church choir took her coat like she was handling a queen's robes. Somebody put a cup of coffee in her scarred hands, fixed exactly right, 2 sugars, splash of milk, because half the people in that room had been watching her drink coffee for 40 years. And my mother, my tough, proud, never-needs-a-fuss mother, stood in the middle of all of it blinking fast and pretending the steam tables were making her eyes water. We were carving that roast on the serving line, Mom in an apron beside me bossing my knife angle when the doors banged open at 5:45. My wife came in first, coat half buttoned, phone still in her hand from the dozen calls I hadn't answered. Behind her came her mother in heels that had no business on a tile floor. Her father red in the face, her brother and his wife trailing like people who'd been kidnapped. They stopped just inside the door, and I watched my mother-in-law take in the folding chairs, the paper snowflakes, the food line, the people, and arrange her face into a look I knew real well, the yard sale fork look. Here's what they expected, I think, a scene. Me, embarrassed, lured back home with the food. What they got instead was 150 people who did not know who they were and did not care. In that hall, my father-in-law's club membership was worth exactly 1 folding chair, same as everybody else's. My wife marched up to the serving line. "Gordon, outside now. You stole Christmas dinner." "Nothing got stolen," I said, and I kept carving. "Dinner's right here. So's your seat, if you want one. We don't do place cards, though. My parents drove 40 minutes. Then they must be hungry. That's when Hutch came over. He didn't hurry. Hutch never hurries. He wiped his hands on his apron, looked at my wife, looked at her parents by the door, and then said, in a voice that wasn't loud but carried to every corner of that hall, the way a chief petty officer's voice does, "Ma'am, I don't know you, so I'll just tell you what we know in here. That lady next to your husband fed every hungry kid in this neighborhood for 38 years. Fed some of their kids after that. There's grown men in this room tonight who'd have gone to school empty if it wasn't for her." He nodded once, slow. "Anywhere she stands is the head of the table. Y'all are welcome to join it." The hall didn't laugh and it didn't clap. It did something better. It murmured. That low, certain, church-like sound a room makes when somebody says a true thing out loud. Heads nodding. A widow at the front table said, "Amen," like she was settling a bill. And I watched my wife's face go through about 4 seasons in 5 seconds. She looked at her mother, then at mine, at Mom in her apron, surrounded by people, those scarred hands resting easy on the serving counter like they'd finally come home, and something in my wife's expression cracked straight down the middle, not anger. I know her angry. This was the other thing. The thing that only shows up when a person sees themselves clearly and all at once, with no warning and no makeup on it. But I had one more wrench to turn. I dried my hands, took out my phone, and pulled up the post I'd asked the center's volunteer coordinator to put on their Facebook page about a half hour earlier. I held it up so my wife and her parents could read it, so the folks nearby could hear me read it. St. Bridget's Community Center sends a heartfelt Christmas thank you to our generous neighbors, and I'll just read the names here for donating a complete prime rib Christmas dinner to tonight's community meal. Because of families like yours, no one in our neighborhood eats alone on Christmas Eve. I looked up. I had them tag all of you. Your bridge club's already sharing it. 41 likes. Oh, and the Gazette photographer's here somewhere, so smile if she comes by. My father-in-law made a sound like a drain letting go. My mother-in-law went the color of cold gravy. Because here's the beauty of it, and I knew it when I set it up. There was nothing they could do. Complain publicly that they hadn't meant to feed the poor on Christmas, stand in the doorway of a charity dinner, and demand their roast back, in heels, in front of a photographer. They were trapped inside the exact reputation they'd spent their whole lives polishing. The hall figured out what was happening in pieces, and the laughter that rolled through wasn't mean. It was warm and rumbling and righteous, the sound a room makes when the right thing happens to the right people. Her parents lasted about 90 more seconds. Her father muttered something about the club's late seating, took his wife's elbow, and the two of them walked out into the cold past, a folding table of veterans who didn't so much as look up from their plates. Her brother glanced at the food line, at his wife shrugged like a man laying down a losing hand, and got in line. I'll always give him that. My wife didn't leave. She stood there in her half-buttoned coat in the middle of that hall for a long moment, watching her parents' taillights through the window. Then she watched my mother. Mom had a little girl up at the dessert table by then, maybe 6 years old, and she was letting the child press the fork marks into the peanut butter cookies, guiding her hand, laughing at something only the two of them heard. Every soul who passed touched Mom's shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Miss D. Merry Christmas, Miss D." Like a hymn with one line. My wife came and stood next to me at the carving station. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, real quietly, "They all know her." "They've always known her," I said. "You just never looked at anything but her hands." She flinched. I let her. "Some medicine works better without sugar." "I told myself it was about Mom and Daddy being comfortable," she said. Her voice was barely holding the road. It wasn't. I didn't want to be the woman whose mother-in-law was the lunch lady. I wanted— She stopped, and her eyes filled up. I don't even know what I wanted. Something that looks like a magazine. "Magazines don't keep you warm," I said. "I could find another wife if it ever came to that." I won't ever find another mother. You needed to know which way that math runs." She nodded, slow, like the nod cost her something. Then she did the only thing that could have moved me even an inch right then. She took off her coat, hung it on a folding chair, walked over to my mother, and said loud enough for me to hear. Walked over to my mother, and said loud enough for me to hear, "Miss D, can you put me to work?" My mother looked at her for a long beat. 84 years of reading rooms in that look. Then she handed my wife a ladle and said, "Gravy's getting low, honey. Mind the splash. It bites." I had to step into the coat room for a minute after that. Smoke from the kitchen, I'd have told anybody who asked. Later. Plates cleared, coffee going around, somebody's grandkids asleep across 2 folding chairs. Mom and I sat at the end of a long table with pie we were too full to finish. She watched the room a while. Hutch telling lies about the Navy, my wife stacking chairs with the choir ladies, sleeves pushed up, hair coming loose, looking more like a human being than I'd seen her look in years. Mom patted my arm with that crooked-thumbed hand. 38 years, she said. I stood on the other side of the counter making sure no child of this town ever ate alone. Her voice wobbled, just once, just enough. Tonight, my own boy made sure I didn't. That's the whole harvest, Gordy. Right there. That's everything I ever planted coming up. I couldn't say anything back, so I just put my hand over hers, scars and all, and we sat there while the hall hummed around us. Worth more than any roast. Worth more than anything I own. I won't pretend it all healed by New Year's, because that's not how marriages work and you're too smart to believe it. My wife and I started counseling the second week of January. Her idea, which mattered. There were hard nights. There was a hard conversation where she admitted she'd spent her whole life auditioning for her parents and was tired of never getting the part. Her folks went quiet on us for a couple of months, and I'd be lying if I said the house didn't feel lighter for it. They came around eventually, smaller somehow, careful in a way they'd never been. Her mother has never once mentioned that Facebook post. It's still up. 63 shares, last I checked. I check. The Sunday after Christmas, my wife asked my mother over for supper. Nothing fancy. Pot roast, the everyday plates. And my wife sat next to her, not across from her, and asked her questions, and then did the thing she'd never done in 12 years. She listened to the answers. Mom told the story about the blizzard of '78, cooking by flashlight for the National Guard guys who got the school generator running. My wife laughed till she had to put her fork down. On the way out, Mom hugged her. First real hug between those two. Ever. And in the porch light I saw my wife holding on a second longer than she had to. This past December, we didn't host Christmas Eve at our house. We hosted it at the hall on Leland Street. Same folding tables, same paper snowflakes. Except this time my wife spent 2 days cooking sides with my mother in our kitchen, the two of them arguing about nutmeg like an old married couple. My wife's brother came and brought his kids. Hutch said the blessing. Mom sat at the head of the longest table, because in that room, like the man said, anywhere she stands is the head of the table. And somewhere between the carving and the coffee, I stood at the back of that hall and understood something it took me 63 years to put into words. Class was never the china or the club or the candles. Class is a woman with burn scars on her arms, slipping a second breakfast to a hungry kid and marking it down as a spill. Class is how you treat the people who can't do a single thing for you, and the truest measure of any man or woman alive is how they treat the ones who wore themselves out raising them. So before I let you go, let me say the thing I'd want somebody to say to me. If your mother or your father is still living, don't wait. Don't wait for a holiday. And God knows, don't wait for a funeral to say what they need to hear. Call them tonight. Sit at their table, eat their cooking, and ask for the old stories and listen like it matters, because it does, and because one day the phone will ring and there won't be anybody on the other end to call you by your childhood name. Rough hands raised most of us. Honor them while they can still feel yours. A parent's love is the one debt you can never repay, only pass on. The fanciest table in the world is poorer than a folding chair next to your mother. Don't let the people who loved you first be the ones you remember last. If this story touched something in you, tell me about your mother or your father in the comments, where they worked, what their hands looked like, what they taught you. I read every single one, and I mean that. Merry Christmas to you and yours, from Uncle Marvin's family to your own. And go on now. Call your mama. I keep coming back to those 6-place cards on the kitchen island. Everything that happened on Christmas Eve was already written in them, long before I loaded that roast into my van. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're young. Nothing in this life lands on you out of nowhere. Every harvest has a planting season. My mother spent 38 years slipping second breakfasts to hungry kids and marking them down as spills. And 40 years later, a hall full of grown men stood up when she walked in. My wife's parents spent 40 years polishing an image instead of a heart, and one Facebook post trapped them inside it like a bug in amber. Neither outcome was luck. Both were invoices finally coming due. And me? I'd spent 11 Christmases planting silence, telling myself I was keeping the peace when really I was just renting it, and the interest was coming out of my mother's dignity. The night I finally acted, I wasn't being brave so much as I was settling my own bill. Doing right by the people who did right by you isn't a favor. It's a debt. The longer you let it sit, the more it costs somebody you love. But here's what I want you to take from Miss D's story, because the rib roast was never the point. What saved that night, and honestly what saved my marriage, came down to 3 things. My mother had been teaching me from behind a steam table my whole life, whether I was paying attention or not. The first is plain decency, the kind that holds when nobody's watching and it costs you something. Mom fed kids who couldn't pay and never told a soul. That quiet goodness is why 150 people rose to defend her without being asked. Character is the only savings account that never gets robbed. The second is using your head before your fists or your mouth. I wanted to flip that table, believe me. Instead, I stood in a cold garage until the anger cooled into a plan. I didn't shout one time that night, and that's exactly why it worked. Rage makes noise. Wisdom makes moves. If something in your life is broken, take it apart calmly, keep what's good, and rebuild it better. A loud man empties the room. A thinking man rearranges it. The third is the grit to follow through when it would be easier to fold. It took my mother 20 years of double shifts to raise me alone. It took my wife a year of hard, unglamorous work to become someone her own mother wouldn't recognize in the best way. Anything worth keeping gets built the way Mom built me, one early morning at a time, long after the feeling wears off. Live decent, think slow, and don't quit. Do that and you won't have to chase respect. It'll be waiting at your table, in the chair you saved for the one who loved you first.